But let's move on to the last speaker, whom everybody knows now. And it's appropriate that she is the last speaker to close what she started off. So thank you very much for this conference. Despite or rather my criticisms, it's been a really enlightening experience for me. To begin, I mean, let's put it this way. I've learned a heck of a lot about Ireland's place in empire. And I do know of the links between Ireland and South Africa, both the aristocracy, but also the foot soldiers that were in the British Army. And those sets of issues, I guess, need to be researched in our context. So thank you very much. Briony.
Thank you very much. And of course, there's a problem with going last, isn't there, which is that you have to somehow answer some of these really difficult questions that have been coming up, not only this evening, but all the way through the conference. As you've heard from the shuffling of papers, I've tried to cut this paper down to a quarter of the size that it was this morning. It's been a wonderful few days for me. It's been a deeply learning few days, of course. And I want to start by saying a personal thanks to everyone for coming. It's been a very interesting time the last year since we've been trying to put this conference together. And as speaker after speaker said they were coming, you know, we've felt the thing gathering momentum. And I'll finish with some thoughts at the very end about why I think it is that, you know, we haven't quite got that right. I want to address as well all the virtual joiners in the room and say hello to you. And I realize one of the technical tangles that we've been fighting with the whole time has been to make sure that the Q&A were reflected. So if we haven't answered those, you know, please do get in touch, and we'll try and find other ways of making those questions heard or comments heard. I also want to thank National Museums NI, as I did yesterday, the Irish Museums Association, the Northern Ireland Museums Council, and the Centre for the Study of Historic Irish Houses and Estates, who have been extraordinary in the support that they've given this project right from the start. This project, Museums, Empire and Northern Irish Identity, of which this conference is one objective. The new conversations and networks to which we hoped this conference might make a contribution. I think, you know, the range of people that have been in the room, hopefully there have been conversations started which will continue and grow and improve in some cases. I don't know whether my presentation is up, Tim. Sorry, I've just realized. What? Oh, do I have to load it?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Good, all right. So, as Dom said at the dinner last night, my explorations of this subject began and are middling and will never end with worry. This is a photo of my grandfather, who in the 1950s was the colonial director of education in Hong Kong. And in those post-war years, when British presence in the colony had been so profoundly undermined by the Japanese occupation and was being increasingly put under pressure from mainland China, the school's development agenda and the curriculum that he ran were devised not only to deliver a British system of education, but also contained components that would be questionable today and were also questioned at the time. Elements of the policy that are relevant to today's debates and yesterday's debates included, for example, the de-emphasis of recent Chinese history, with a focus instead on the Chinese imperial period, which was at a sufficient temporal distance to be useful for appearing to nourish Chinese identities, while also avoiding any taint of controversy over the British domination of the islands. So here my grandfather is, boarding a sampan to be carried away to visit a school on an island off the main island of Hong Kong. And this photo was probably taken in about 1959 or 1960. There are, of course, other people in this image whose identities I will never know and cannot be discovered. Certainly not using the range of contacts and networks and language that I have in my possession. But in my possession, there are about 3,500 photographs, including prints and slides, that record the family's 30 years in Hong Kong. Most of these date to after the Second World War, because during it my grandfather was a prisoner of war, and everything except what my grandmother and her two children, one of whom was my father, had taken with them when they evacuated to Sydney was lost. And it won't surprise anyone here to know that understandings of photography in Hong Kong during this period vary enormously depending on who you are. There are quite a few Facebook sites that publish images like this one for the purpose of nostalgic recall, not only by former British so-called expats, but also by Chinese and the many other cultural groups that made up the diverse society that Hong Kong was at the time. These are the sites to which I have access, these so-called expat sites. I have not delved deeply enough into which alternative views on colonial British presence in Hong Kong are represented, not only because I cannot read Chinese, but also because, quite simply, I have more British expat contacts than I do Chinese to draw upon. So what I've learned about Chinese memories of Hong Kong at that time, I've mostly learned from Northern Irish Chinese friends and colleagues who have generously advised as I've tried to get to grips with this troubling family archive. What I want to draw your attention to in this slide is not only the startling inequality, everything that's going on here, which speaks for itself. I also want to point out the imprint on the bottom of the slide, which reads, Empire Made. The typeface suggests that the plastic casing for the slide, though, was produced in Hong Kong. So when I was doing my PhD, my now mentor, Emma Rice, who you've just seen, indulged me with a, at least for me, thoroughly enjoyable back and forth about colonial photography. Occasionally I'd come across an image like this one and send it across to her in London. And with this one, she wrote back, there are so many metaphors and puns in that image that I hardly know where to start. Empire made indeed. So if by using this photo, it feels as though I'm over-centering myself, then I can only apologize, but I am using it to put it to work. The reason why I find images like this so viscerally troubling is that they speak not only of identities in the past that we can choose to reject, embrace, or anything in between. They speak of identities in the here and now as well. Looking at images like this is for me not just a matter of visual ethnography, or to put it a different way, of reflection on the past. It's also about recognizing colonialism within ourselves. The question at the heart of my concern, and one which I think may be a rhetorical one, is also one that is subjective as well as dialogic. What does it mean in our society to be empire made? So this conference, and as I've said, the networks to which I hope it will lead, are one of the objectives of the project that this many project set out to question. How do people in Northern Ireland connect with museum collections associated with colonialism and the British Empire? Do histories of ethnic division in Northern Ireland correlate with binary attitudes to items collected globally? Do people feel that empire and colonialism affect their own lives? What themes are they interested in discussing in relation to these topics? Thinking back, the project is in a way connected with a conversation I had with a curator in the People's Palace in Glasgow, whom I met close to the beginning of my career in the mid-1990s, when the degree of engagement with communities surrounding the museum was a very different thing to what it was after she was there. And she said that, and this will not be new now to anybody here, that what I needed to find if I wanted to connect was Velcro. And in her practice, she was working with women's groups around the People's Palace and working on issues like domestic abuse, divorce, abortion. And at the time, those were revolutionary things to be doing in museums. But the reason why I'm coming back to Velcro is that I think that what adheres colonialism and empire to identities in Northern Ireland is particularly sticky. So the key theoretical insight that I'm trying to produce here is not an understanding of whether people identify with categorizations of us and other in general. And I've been working on tools, which I won't go through, to try and query some of these questions. And this is one which is very imperfect, but a work in progress. Rather, it's about probing whether people relate to items in binary ways, because as we've been discussing at this conference, colonialism and empire produced, among many other things, binary divisions in how the world was organized and conceptualized. In presenting this model, and have been testing it through this research that I've been doing, I'm alert to the potential criticism that an emphasis on binaries reifies them. Since 2014, when I started working on my PhD, and since the 1990s, when I started reaching out to local groups and trying to learn about ways to do that in Edinburgh, where I worked, I've been seeking ways of addressing colonial histories that might alleviate, rather than inflame, the risk of racialized prejudice and violence. In museum spaces, binaries are being explicitly addressed and dismantled, as we know from Hannah's talk yesterday. But in academic writing, particularly in the fields of public history and anthropology, to which I hope to start to make a contribution, this would be a very difficult, perhaps impossible field of research if we didn't try and understand the precise nature of the binaries, including in relation to historic and more recent conflicts in Northern Ireland, to which we hope to make a difference. Tackling perceptions of ethnic binaries is one of the key areas of concern in social policy in Northern Ireland, and is critical to the very important good relations work that is going on in museums. The divided society in which we live has not only been produced by binary ideas about ethnicity. In fact, binaries are enshrined in the whole of the consociational model that secures our peace. The power sharing that Northern Ireland has achieved was set out to establish and secure much needed, wanted, and fought for, but nonetheless binary representation across the two demographically largest ethnicity blocks. Consociationality is furthermore not only a matter for the Northern Ireland Assembly, the consociational system for appointing ministers and therefore for managing departments determines every aspect of public life in Northern Ireland and embraces all public policy, including that which state-funded museums are demanded to support. It's also important to recognise that the academic framing for this research is to a large degree supplied by writers who have justifiably centred on how colonialism was built on and created systems of meaning that relied on binary segregation. The theoretical and historical context for this work is the writing of historians on Ireland like Jane Allmeyer, from whom we've just heard, Brendan O'Leary, Kevin Kenny, Keith Jeffrey, Stephen Howe, Bill Rolston, Robbie McVeigh, to mention only a few. all of these writers have, in one way or another, considered Ireland's dual relationships, both within and as an agent of the British Empire. A framework even closer to home, and I realise, Shahid, I can't see you, so please wave at me round the corner if I'm going on. A framework even closer to home is the work on the public narration of contended pasts in the work of Dom Bryan, Emma Rice, and Alwyn Perdue, all of whose wonderful brains have provided the intellectual fuel that have made this conference happen. Like everyone in this room, all have looked at what it means to be both Irish and Northern Irish, to be both Irish and British, and also to be indissolubly situated within the history of the British Empire. Therefore, to try and undertake research in this field without acknowledging both the duality of Ireland's position that has created a particular context for it in Northern Ireland, and considering global post-colonial discourse, which not only doesn't shy away from discussing binaries, but seeks to understand them in depth, would be to seek to overlook important facets of our society. I would argue too that it's precisely because of perceptions about division and because of the presence of these subjects to inflame binary division that work on understanding how the legacies of colonialism in and of Ireland affect interpretation in museums, and why it's such an urgent field for academic as well as practical investigation. Since I began the research, I've been thinking about how to acknowledge both historic and contemporary contexts of binary discourse and conflict, while also doing this work ethically, respectfully, and in a way that contributes to a better and fairer future. Like everyone trying to navigate this seemingly intractable problem, I'm arriving at new understandings. I'm trying to keep pace with rapidly changing landscapes of reform. Also, like everyone here today and yesterday, like those online, I'm acutely aware of the risk of getting this wrong. Inclusive practice is performed culturally and socially, but I would argue that it's driven by political motivations. All socially conscious movements are. Combine this political aspect with the fact that in Northern Ireland, looking head-on at colonialism in museums is new. For both these reasons, as Corinne showed us yesterday, we're all exposed to the pressure of personal and professional risk, and this is not just a matter of writing academic papers. This is a risk that Emma, Dom, and I have been in constant communication about since the start of the conference and in the months and couple of years that have led up to it. To varying degrees, not only we as a conference team, but all of us here are putting the future of the societies in which we live at risk. So we've arrived at a problem. How to acknowledge that histories of racism and sectarianism might impact on perspectives on objects from around the world without identifying interviewees in relation to the same binaries we're trying to overcome. This is in relation to my research, the work that I've been doing interviewing people. Both racism and sectarianism are saturated with ideas about who is us and who is other. In other words, they're performed in relation to imagined communities about stereotypes. There's also an usness and otherness that is intrinsic to historic items and to societal structures of the past, including those created and perpetrated, as I've said, by colonialism and imperialism. For this reason, it can be difficult for people in contemporary communities, and in those I include myself, and Dom and I have an ongoing conversation about what a community is, to identify with items that they connect with periods in time and with social systems of which they have no direct or only indirect experience, indirect in the case of me in Hong Kong. So for all these reasons, I felt that asking people about whether items in museums felt like us or other might be useful as a means both of understanding how, given Northern Ireland's own politics, people relate to these items, and more particularly to the societies and the people that created them, but also as a way of better understanding the motivations for people wanting to engage with these items and the complex issues they raise in Northern Ireland. So many has been about live testing and experimenting with tool that I'm just beginning to think my way around. And I don't want to spend any more time on that tool now. And there are problems with it, but I would very much value everybody's input in the weeks ahead and the months ahead. I want to go instead, and there's a lot of content here because I had something like 733 pages of transcripts to go through, and there's a lot of content which I'm beginning to code and try and understand. But these are the themes that people raised in extended conversation. So these are the open conversation themes that they raised that weren't in response to direct open questions as part of the research. So when we were talking about colonialism and empire, they talked about all of these issues. And to a greater or lesser extent, there are binary perspectives on these as well as a spectrum of perspectives. And you can see how in Northern Ireland, when you start talking about imperialism and colonialism, these very difficult subjects immediately come to the fore. So, in conclusion for now, I want to summarise by indicating how, for everyone, this is a deeply personal project. I've enjoyed at this conference the very frank sharing of personal backgrounds. Talking about where we ourselves are situated in relation to this subject is, in my view, a fundamental aspect of behaving with integrity, both in academia and in museums. Museums as cultural spaces are not neutral. We know that, but nor are we as individuals, as the people who are trying to do the work. Thank you.